The studio lights were hot, the crowd buzzing with anticipation. The network had billed it as an evening of legends, a rare, live televised sit-down between two of Hollywood's most iconic figures, Robert De Niro and Denzel Washington. What they didn't anticipate was that the discussion would erupt into one of the most talked-about on-air clashes in years. The moderator had just rapped a question about social responsibility in the entertainment industry when De Niro suddenly leaned forward, his voice sharper than expected. "You know, Denzel," he said with a dry chuckle, "you're a great actor, no doubt. But lately, you've been acting like a preacher more than a performer. Maybe stay in your lane." Gasps rippled across the studio. Even the moderator froze for a second. Denzel blinked, straightened in his chair, and locked eyes with De Niro. The silence was thick, not uncomfortable, but electric, like the second before a lightning strike. Denzel leaned forward slowly, his voice calm but cutting. "So let me get this straight, Bob. You think standing up for something, speaking on truth, justice, community, that's outside my lane?" De Niro shrugged with a dismissive smirk. "I just think people come to you for movies, not moral lectures. You're not running a church, you're doing press tours." The crowd didn't know whether to laugh or recoil. But Denzel didn't flinch. "You're right. I'm not a pastor. I'm a man with a platform. And if I choose to use that platform to speak to the pain, the struggle, and the beauty of our people, I will. If that makes you uncomfortable, maybe it's your lane that's too narrow." The studio was dead silent. One audience member whispered, "Damn," under their breath. De Niro raised his eyebrows, clearly not expecting such a direct rebuttal. "I'm just saying, stick to what you're good at." Denzel's gaze didn't waver. "I am." The moderator cleared her throat, clearly rattled. "Gentlemen, let's keep this respectful." But it was too late. The room had already chosen its battleground. Denzel didn't look away. His calm expression betrayed nothing, no anger, no frustration, just focus. The crowd sensed it. This wasn't just about two actors disagreeing. This was about something deeper: identity, voice, legacy. And De Niro, perhaps unknowingly, had touched a nerve. "You know," Denzel began, his tone low and deliberate, "when I was growing up in Mount Vernon, nobody handed me a script. I didn't get to rehearse dignity. I didn't get to act like my life mattered. I had to live it. Earn it. Fight for it." De Niro shifted in his seat but didn't interrupt. Denzel continued, eyes still locked on his. "So, when you say, stay in your lane, what you're really saying is, don't make me uncomfortable. You want me to entertain you, but not challenge you. Make you laugh, but not make you think. You're not the first to try that." A quiet clap echoed from the back row of the audience. Then another. It wasn't orchestrated, just real. Someone in the studio could be heard whispering, "That's real talk." De Niro raised a hand. "Look, Denzel. Don't twist this. I'm just saying, this younger generation doesn't need more celebrities acting like they've got all the answers. The world's complicated. Maybe we should be humble enough to admit we don't know everything." Denzel nodded slowly. "I agree. We don't have all the answers. But silence isn't humility, it's surrender. And if I've got young people listening, if I've got a stage, I'm not going to waste it pretending injustice is someone else's problem." The moderator glanced nervously at her producers through the control room glass. They were gesturing for her to let it roll. Ratings were spiking. Denzel leaned slightly toward De Niro, his voice now softer but more piercing. "You call it moral preaching. I call it moral memory. Some of us don't have the luxury of forgetting where we came from." De Niro pursed his lips, not angry, just surprised. This wasn't the Denzel he thought he'd spar with. This wasn't a performance. It was a reckoning. The tension in the room had thickened. Not hostile, but charged. And it was clear, this wasn't going to be a quick exchange. The moderator tried again to cut the tension. Maybe we could shift gears. No, Denzel said firmly but respectfully, without taking his eyes off De Niro. Let's not shift. Let's sit in it. Let's stay in this moment, since we're here. The crowd held its breath. De Niro adjusted his cufflinks, letting out a small, visible exhale, more irritation than exhaustion. Denzel leaned back in his chair now, his voice like velvet wrapped around steel. Bob, you made a career playing men with grit. Men who stood for something. And now here we are, and I stand for something, and it's suddenly a problem? De Niro tilted his head. There's a difference between standing for something and preaching about everything. You don't have to turn every award speech, every interview, every panel into a TED Talk. Denzel chuckled, low and controlled. You mean like when you spent 10 minutes bashing political figures at the Tony Awards? Laughter burst from the audience, sharp, knowing, unscripted. De Niro blinked. That was different. How? Denzel asked. Silence. I'll tell you how it's different, Denzel said, voice tightening just enough to cut. You get called passionate. I get called divisive. You're speaking your mind. I'm overstepping my role. You talk, it's brave. I talk, it's a distraction. That's the difference. The camera cut briefly to the live audience. Some were nodding, some sitting stiffly. Others looked like they weren't sure what they had tuned in for, but they couldn't look away. De Niro didn't respond immediately. He adjusted in his seat again. Not because he was uncomfortable, but because he knew he'd just been cornered without being yelled at. And that, in a debate, was far more dangerous. You think I'm part of the problem? He asked, calmly. I think you forgot that some of us never got to play pretend, Denzel replied. We had to live the stories you cashed checks on. It wasn't an attack. It was a truth spoken plainly. And the studio? Silent. The moderator glanced at the teleprompter, which was now completely off script. She looked up again. Do you want to respond, Mr. De Niro? De Niro cleared his throat. I do. De Niro sat upright, resting his elbows on the arms of his chair. For a second, he stared down at the floor, as if searching for the precise words to level the playing field again. When he looked up, there was no smirk, only steel. You want to talk about who lived it? De Niro said slowly. You think I grew up in some palace? I was raised in the village during the 40s, Denzel. My dad was gay before anyone dared to say the word. I saw struggle. I saw rejection. So don't assume I had it easy just because my skin was lighter. The crowd stirred. It wasn't an applause line. It wasn't meant to be. It was a counterpunch. Honest. Raw. Denzel nodded, just once. That's fair. And I won't take that from you. But the question isn't whether you've struggled. It's what you do once you've survived. Do you silence the next man's voice, or do you hand him a microphone? De Niro exhaled sharply through his nose. What I don't do is turn every moment into a revolution. Sometimes people just want to watch a damn movie without being reminded how broken the world is. That was it. Denzel leaned forward again, this time with the fire returning to his eyes. See, that's the difference between you and me. You think entertainment and truth are enemies. I believe they're married. Woven. One feeds the other. People don't come to my films to escape, they come to feel seen. A ripple of applause began in the left side of the audience, rising steadily. De Niro held up his hand, trying to hold back the swell. It's not about being seen. It's about skill. Art. Story. Not activism. And yet here you are, Denzel shot back, trying to gatekeep both. Boom. The moderator's pen dropped from her hand onto the desk. She didn't even pick it up. Denzel kept his tone even, but every word was a blow. I didn't come here to win a debate. I came to remind people that some of us are still fighting for a seat at a table we helped build. And I don't need your permission to speak. The room felt like it might combust. De Niro stared, expression unreadable. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. In that brief pause, it was clear, he hadn't lost the argument. He'd just realized Denzel was never playing his game in the first place. You didn't need my permission, De Niro finally replied, leaning back in his chair, forcing a tight smile. But you sure came looking for my attention. Denzel didn't blink. I didn't come looking for attention, Bob. I came because too many people watch you and take what you say as gospel. And right now, the gospel's got holes. The audience murmured. Someone up front gasped softly. The moderator instinctively reached for her earpiece, but the producers gave no cue. This moment was too real to interrupt. I've admired your work, Denzel continued. But admiration doesn't mean obedience. And it doesn't mean silence when the same voice that once inspired becomes the voice that says, know your place. De Niro folded his arms. Maybe I just don't like being lectured by someone who thinks fame makes him a prophet. That line got a reaction, a mix of claps and groans. Denzel, however, remained still. Fame, he repeated, his voice low and controlled. Fame didn't raise me. Fame didn't bury my friends. Fame didn't chase me down sidewalks just for being black and breathing. You think this is about status? No. This is about responsibility. And I take mine seriously. He turned slightly toward the crowd, but his voice stayed intimate, almost quiet, like he was speaking to each viewer one-on-one. You call it a lecture. I call it truth. And sometimes truth comes from the mouths you least expect. From the men who won't smile when they should shout. From those who know what it costs to be heard. Silence wrapped the room like a heavy blanket. De Niro's eyes narrowed, sensing his footing slipping. So what now? He said. You want to be the conscience of Hollywood? Denzel looked him square in the eye. No. I want to be the echo of those you never let in the room. The studio shook with quiet awe. No dramatic music. No applause sign. Just stillness. Because everyone, even De Niro, knew, something had shifted. And this wasn't a scripted debate. This was a reckoning. De Niro finally straightened his posture, as if remembering who he was, a Hollywood legend, a cinematic titan, a man whose name carried decades of prestige. He wasn't going to be outshined without trying. You talk like you're the only one who's paid dues, he said, tone clipped. I've been in this industry since before you were old enough to read a script. Denzel gave him a slow nod. That's right. And in all those years, did you ever once have to ask if the room was safe before you spoke your truth? De Niro didn't answer. Did you ever look out at a crowd and wonder if your face alone made them uncomfortable before you said a word? Still, silence. Denzel leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. You see, Bob. You didn't just grow up in the industry. You grew through it. They made room for you. You were the mold. I had to carve space with a chisel. The audience shifted, the weight of that truth unmistakable. And yet, Denzel continued, you still feel the need to pull rank. To remind everyone of your legacy when someone challenges your comfort zone. De Niro's jaw twitched. I'm not pulling rank. I'm defending a craft. A standard. No, Denzel said, voice now edged with steel. You're defending a hierarchy. One where speaking out makes you a problem. One where being grateful is code for stay quiet. And I refuse. He paused, then dropped the sentence that sucked the oxygen out of the room. You don't want actors with a voice. You want actors on a leash. The studio erupted, a roar of shock, disbelief, and applause all blended into one. Even the camera operators flinched slightly as they repositioned to catch De Niro's face. He was still. Not humiliated. Not angry. Just, exposed. The moderator leaned in, voice shaking. Gentlemen, perhaps. No, Denzel said, cutting her off gently. We're not done. Not if this is the moment we stop pretending civility matters more than truth. And with that, he turned back to De Niro. Respect isn't silence, Bob. And it sure as hell isn't obedience. The crowd had no cue cards to follow, but they rose anyway. A standing ovation, not for showmanship, but for the audacity of honesty. De Niro remained seated, but something had shifted in his eyes, not defeat, but calculation. As if weighing whether another blow would serve him or sink him. He reached for his water glass but didn't drink. You think you're teaching me something I haven't seen? He asked, his voice lower now. I've stood up for people. I've spoken out. I've marched. Denzel didn't flinch. I know. That's what made this so disappointing. It wasn't a punch, it was a mirror. And it stung deeper. You marched, Denzel continued. But you also mocked. You stood with the people until it cost you comfort. Then you stepped back and started throwing stones at those who kept marching. The audience froze, hanging on every word. I'm not saying you didn't do good, Denzel added. I'm saying you stopped when the applause turned to silence. When it was no longer cool to care. De Niro opened his mouth, then hesitated. That hesitation said everything. Denzel stood up. It wasn't theatrical. It wasn't planned. It was instinct. You've had a long road, Bob, he said. But your lane wasn't built the same. My lane had potholes named prejudice. Speed bumps called stereotypes. And you're sitting here telling me to stay in that lane? He gestured to the audience. Do you hear that? That silence? That's the sound of people realizing how many voices they've tuned out for comfort. De Niro looked to the moderator, then to the camera. He didn't look defiant anymore. He looked small. Denzel took a breath. You can call me preachy. You can say I've gone soft. You can roll your eyes and act like I'm making a scene. But deep down, even you know, truth has never been polite. He turned, locking eyes with the camera now. And I won't apologize for making people feel something. Not anymore. It was no longer a debate. It was a declaration. And every single person in the studio knew, they were watching a line being drawn that wouldn't be erased when the credits rolled. The silence after Denzel's words was thick, not out of discomfort, but revelation. It was the silence that comes right before something shifts permanently. De Niro sat straighter, struggling to recenter himself. You want a medal for being loud? He asked, the sarcasm strained, hollow. Denzel didn't even look at him this time. His gaze stayed on the audience. No, he replied, calm. I want accountability. And I want it louder than the applause given to silence. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. You see, Denzel continued, men like me, we've had to fight for space in rooms built without our names on the doors. And when we finally walk in, we're told to be grateful. To be humble. To play nice. He turned slowly back to De Niro. You had the luxury of rage. I was taught survival. You got to scream your lines into history. I had to whisper just to be heard in casting rooms. De Niro tried to chuckle, but it caught in his throat. You think I didn't struggle? Oh, I know you struggled, Denzel said, nodding. But your struggle wasn't my silence. Your struggle didn't come with disclaimers taped to your presence. Then he stepped forward, not aggressive, not boastful, but deliberate. You want to diminish what I'm saying by calling it noise, he said, pointing gently toward the stage floor. But this platform? It was built by noise. By uncomfortable truth. By voices you used to respect, until they came from people you didn't expect. De Niro looked down, for the first time, not from arrogance, but reflection. And Denzel closed the distance. I'm not staying in any damn lane, Bob. Because the road you walked was paved smooth by the silence of people like me. And now that we're speaking up, you call it chaos. His voice rose, not yelling, just undeniable. Then let it be chaos. Because out of chaos comes change. A thunder of applause followed. Not scripted. Not prompted. Just honest. The moderator sat frozen, eyes wide, mouth slightly parted. Even the camera zoomed in tighter, not wanting to miss a flicker of De Niro's expression, which now wavered between pride and pain. He had met his match. And the whole world was watching. De Niro's fingers curled around the edge of his seat. The applause still echoed, but it wasn't for him. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't the anchor in the room, he was the weight. And Denzel had just lifted it. "I didn't come here to fight," De Niro muttered, almost under his breath. "No," Denzel said sharply, "you came here to dismiss." That struck. The audience stilled again, breaths held. Denzel took a step back, not to retreat, but to give space to the truth now hanging in the air. "You came here thinking your name alone could silence a voice. That your legacy meant your word was final." He pointed toward the rows of young actors in the front row, their eyes wide, some of them visibly shaken. "But these people? They're not watching two actors argue. They're watching whether it's safe to speak their truth when it's not convenient for the powerful." De Niro's shoulders sank. "You're making me into a villain," he said. Denzel's voice softened, but it didn't lose an ounce of force. "No, Bob. I'm making you into a mirror. You can choose what to see in it." He turned back to the audience. "I didn't build my career to be liked. I didn't survive this industry to win points. I came here with stories. With scars. With a voice people tried to bury under politeness and politics." The room felt different now. Charged. Awake. "I'm tired of watching artists get shut down for being too much. Too political. Too emotional. Too real." He stared directly into the main camera now. "If you're uncomfortable, it means you're listening." Even the control room paused, switching angles. Denzel continued, eyes burning not with anger, but clarity. "And if your idea of respect means silence, then I'd rather be loud." For a few seconds, De Niro looked like he might stand, might walk out, might shout back. But instead, he whispered, "Maybe I did stop listening." It was quiet. No applause. No gasps. Just recognition. The kind that doesn't need drama. It needs courage. And for the first time that night, De Niro blinked, not to roll his eyes, but to hold back something heavier. Denzel stepped forward again. "Then maybe now's the time to start." The moderator, still wide-eyed, cleared his throat for the first time in nearly 10 minutes. "Gentlemen," he said quietly, "we're almost out of time." But no one moved. Because time, in that moment, wasn't ticking, it was stretching. Holding still for something larger than a TV segment. Denzel looked over the crowd once more, then slowly returned his gaze to De Niro. "You once said," Denzel began, "that movies were where we go to tell the truth when we're too afraid to say it out loud." De Niro's head lifted slightly. "But what happens," Denzel continued, "when the truth walks off the screen, and dares to speak right here, in front of you?" He let the silence settle, let it crawl through the studio's lighting rigs and camera lenses. "This isn't about actors," Denzel said. "It's about accountability. It's about how power disguises itself in charm. And how easy it is to mock what you no longer understand." De Niro exhaled slowly. "Maybe I've been too long in rooms where nobody challenges me." Denzel didn't gloat. He nodded once. Respectfully. "Then I'm glad I was invited into this one." The moderator finally found his voice. "Any last words?" De Niro turned toward Denzel. "I don't agree with everything you said," he admitted. "But I heard you. And maybe that's a start." Denzel extended a hand. It wasn't performative. It wasn't scripted. It was legacy meeting legacy, without armor. They shook. And in that moment, the crowd didn't erupt in applause. They stood. Slowly. One by one. Not to celebrate. But to acknowledge. Denzel stepped away from the desk and headed toward the studio's exit, passing the cameras without even glancing at them. His job wasn't to entertain. It was to awaken. And as the doors closed behind him, his final words still echoed through the studio, not as a line, but as a challenge. Truth isn't always loud. But when it's real, it never leaves quietly. Some voices don't shout, but they can't be silenced. Tonight, Denzel Washington didn't just confront Robert De Niro. He confronted the system that confuses comfort with truth. This wasn't just a clash, it was an awakening. So here's the question. Who do you think was right? Drop your thoughts below and let the conversation begin.